Hi, Chicago. Can you hear us?
Hi, yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you.
Are we recording?
Yes.
Okay. So can we set up the next one?
Yep.
So
It should be open then when they go into it. You gonna stay?
okay, welcome back. Let's start the scenarios. We might finish early, so we'll just get moving with the scenarios. So the first one, we had Natalie, who was a student and was asked by her supervisors to put a third author. This one is a little bit different. So Beth here is an early career academic. She's just started her new job, she's very excited. Her senior colleague, Percy, informs her that he has added her as an author on one of his publications as a welcome gift. Percy suggests he is allocated authorship on one of her publications one day. It boosts both academic CVs and doesn't harm anyone. Everyone does it around here, he tells her. And Beth is grateful for his warm welcome. The question I'd like you to answer, should she accept the gift? Yes or no? So is that up on Socrates?
Yeah.
Over to you, Irene. Andrew B, have you got the link?
Missed it.
In Socrates?
It's July 13. You can, have you got it? There's a QR code otherwise.
We've only got 3 answered.
That's cool. So the responses to the Socrative show that 100% of our colleagues and delegates answered no. So Beth shouldn't accept the gift.
Okay, I'm going to open this up for discussion because this is a real scenario, a real story. And it happens. It's not necessarily restricted to any particular country. It's an academic culture in some countries stronger than others, but it's happening around the world. Should we encourage it? No. But how do we go about changing things? So what if you were a new academic in a place and you get offered an authorship just doing nothing in exchange for something that could happen in the future, and it will, and then it becomes like ping pong. Just you write and add, and I write and I add, and that's the way it goes. And it's not just the ethics of it, it's also the fact that we are perpetrating something that's wrong, completely wrong. Would anyone like to comment? Yes. Is it Ahmad?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Is it classified as an unethical bribe, for example?
In a way, it's unethical, definitely.
Yeah.
whether you call it a bribe or a practice, we could probably say it's an unethical practice because it's quite widespread, unfortunately.
So from your experience, what is the correct action?
She shouldn't accept the gift. How did you want to talk?
But how can you respond to that person without in a diplomatic way?
So diplomacy is one thing, saying the right thing is another. So you might want to say, I don't think it's the right thing for us to do. Gently, politely, courteously. I thank you. I understand, but I'd rather let me get used to the place first, or something like that, because you'll probably be confronted with a scenario of this sort when you're new. Welcome. Andrew B, do you want to talk to this?
I just want to really, if it's classified as an academic integrity.
Absolutely, academic,
Investigated,
not unintegrity. It's wrong. Yeah.
would it get investigated?
If it's reported, I haven't come across people who have reported this. Okay, I know it happens, and I know for a fact that, for example, I know someone who is a very prominent figure who has said to me, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be where I am today. So it hasn't, it's an integrity issue, definitely, but it's not being reported, it's just being give and take. And I think there should be a time where it stops. There should be a time where, you know, we wake up to things and maybe become a little bit more aware of, you know, what's right in this world regarding academia. It might have been, you know, happening before. We just heard a story from Niall that, you know, in some countries, the authorship is being sold. Once a manuscript is being approved, they open it up for auction. Can I invite the Chicago Hub? Would anyone like to talk to this scenario?
Hiya. It's just me over here at the moment. I'll just preface this by saying I am a medical student from the UK, so I don't have much experience in research till I'm actually presenting the very first paper I ever did. So I don't have a lot of knowledge on how it all works. But from what I'm seeing in this case, I would say it's kind of similar to the previous one in that it's kind of the academic who's obviously really early in their career, they may not know, you know, if someone asked me this, I would probably say, okay, if that's what people do, I'll do it. But I think it's actually the senior colleague is the one who's kind of at fault here. It feels a little bit as though they're taking advantage of the newer academic who might not know how it works. And also that this kind of, like you said, ping pong, letting someone write their name on yours if you can write yours on theirs later, it kind of devalues the whole kind of authorship idea of like writing a paper and like doing it for actual academic interest and trying to further knowledge and things. It kind of devalues that whole idea if you're just kind of putting them on papers wherever you can. That's about all I can offer.
No, thank you very much. And, you know, it does happen in all fields of academia. It's a well-known setup. And you might come across it in medicine, I don't know, but thank you for your input. That's very valuable. Yes, I think the accountability falls on the person initiating this, and more likely to be the person who is in power, who knows more about things, knows about, you know, the ins and outs of authorship, and has taken advantage of this new person. Which is part of the reason why we're doing this kind of workshop, to create awareness. And yes, it is like the other scenario, the first one, except that she was even lower on the ranking. She was a PhD student and asked to do something by her supervisors, which is even more of a balance in power. But here, it is sugar-coated, which worries me because sugarcoating is it has no name. You know, you said diplomacy, Hadi, but in academia, it's difficult to say no to someone who's being very kind to you, and this will boost your CV, and you'll be up and up and running soon, and you'll be head of the university within 2 years. And it is sugar-coated, but it is not an ethical pill that is sugar-coated here. Massive integrity issues. And unfortunately, it's happening. So what we're doing here is creating awareness, creating some strengths in people who are of less power and will be powerful one day, but to be aware when they do become powerful, not to take advantage of the vulnerable, the younger, the early career researchers or PhD students or honors students, to push them around and tell them what authorship to do. I will move on to the next one. And you'll notice that Tim, yes, please.
I make a comment and just to share a scenario which I personally have been involved in. And that was, I found myself as an author of a paper which I didn't know that I had written. And it was some people that I met at a conference in another country. And about 18 months later, when I was searching for something else, I found my name on this paper, and it just happened once to me. But then I decided I wasn't actually collaborating with this group of people, but we had definitely had a discussion at a conference. And they took that discussion at the conference that they were able to use my name on a paper that they were writing. So it's maybe a little bit.
Do you think that that was taking advantage of your profile?
Definitely, 100%.
Definitely.
100%. Because and there's reputational damage from every side in relation to authorship. So people must be able to pass the authorship test in order to qualify as an author. I've subsequently met these people at other conferences and just being professional. We definitely talk about this concept, but I didn't see the paper, I didn't see the abstract, I didn't approve the paper, but my name was there.
So it works both ways, doesn't it? And I think with creating awareness, we might be, raising this awareness about, people's rights and people not having rights. And it looks to me, and I'm only predicting that sooner or later, I think the journals are going to have to play a stronger part policing of authorship sooner or later. Because whether or not there's a power imbalance or there's a diplomatic offer for collaboration, either way, and there's more coming about authorship. All these different examples indicate that there's a lot that's gone on in the past that's gone under the carpet. It's gone under because we have deliberately or not deliberately allowed it to happen, thinking, that's the way it is. But actually, now that we are more aware that it isn't right, then maybe people should count to 10 before they add an author. And there are ways to set up things now that didn't exist before. I agree with you, Tim. I think there are several scenarios, not just happening to you and that happened to you, but also things that we weren't very accurate about in my past. I will say I've made mistakes. I look at what's happening today and I think, that wouldn't be accepted now, to have people who hadn't reviewed properly or hadn't given an opinion or hadn't edited with me. to keep them on as authors. I should have argued for their contribution more. And hence I blame myself, but it's not about blaming. It's about, I think, raising awareness and being aware that these things happen. Let's look at scenario 3. So Edward is a keen researcher and medical officer. He's approached by a research team from Big Pharma with an offer. If he's able to recruit 20 patients into their study, he can be listed as an author. Edward can do this easily. He works in the hospital, right? And publishing is greatly acknowledged in his field of medicine. Maybe he wants to do a PhD. Maybe he wants to, be something, a medical specialist of some sort. The question is, should Edward accept the offer? Is it a valid offer?
So for the people who've joined a bit later, if I could ask you to, you can either use this QR code to scan to join the Socrative room, or you can search Socrative in a search engine and enter the room name July 13. Okay, so everyone's answered no. So Edward should not accept this offer.
So let's discuss why. Why do you think he shouldn't accept the offer? So he has patients. He's validly going to recruit the patients. He's going to be across the research, so he's participating in a way, contributing to the data collected. What is wrong with him being author here? Yes, Deb.
I mean, like, I think that he should be like have an acknowledgement in the paper for him getting the participants for the research, but he hasn't contributed enough to the actual research to have authorship.
So you think it's not enough of a contribution?
Well, no, because like he didn't, like, he's only done like one small portion, and that's gaining the patients. Like, if he had actually undertaken the research with the patients once he had recruited them, then perhaps, or assisted with the ideas behind it with the, when they're first developing the research, the conceptualization, then perhaps he could have been put for authorship. But I think just recruiting the patients isn't enough.
Okay. What would be appropriate in your opinion?
Well, like, there's an acknowledgement section that you can put at the end where you acknowledge people who have participated, like, I know library assistants who have assisted with research, and I guess you could definitely acknowledge Ed as well, because he did take time out of his day to recruit the patients, and he should be acknowledged for his work, but perhaps not such a high acknowledgement of authorship on paper.
Who else would like to comment? I'd like to pick their brain.
I think that perhaps I do think it's good if you're there for conceptualization, but maybe that's not always possible, particularly if this comes from pharma. And assuming everything else with the study is okay, he's across it, he's recruiting ethically, he needs to see the final paper, like he needs to be involved in actually.
So what would you do in his place?
I would, if I were him, and this is something I wanted to do, and I felt that publishing was important and I was across the study, I would say, look, I'm happy to, but with the caveat, I need to see the final paper and results and have input into where that's going and how that's actually presented. Because if he doesn't see the final paper, they could write anything with his names on it, which could be a huge reputational risk
Thank you for bringing that up. That is a high risk and a very valid one. And also, do you feel that there is power imbalance here?
Absolutely. And the other thing is, if Big Pharma's doing the study, I don't like why it could be remunerated for his participation to, as an assistant, like a research assistant or something, if he's recruiting for them.
Mhm.
So it's kind of.
Or they might be going around the hospital and telling any doctor, so that they have a sample size of 300, for example. That's huge. And then they'll have, 50 odd authors. So it's about power imbalance, it's about content, it's about reputation. It's also about coercion. This is a type of coercion. So like in the first session when we talked about the gold coins to the soldiers, this is for a medical student or someone, junior in a team. This is an opportunity to publish with a big team, and it is a type of coercion. Andrew, do you want to say anything?
Thanks. I can see the parallel between Tim's scenario before, where Tim could possibly have been acknowledged in his discussion, but not put as an author.
Would have been appropriate.
For that point of contribution, and this is the same sort of, this is how that should play out.
Yes, thank you. Tim, did you want to say something?
Thanks, Irene. Thanks, Betty. I think one of the really important principles in a case like this is that if it's big pharma and it's a fairly big trial or a big research group, then you would have a publication plan a priori, and the publication plan should include the notion of authorship in that publication plan a priori, not being done on the run. Here in this scenario, there's the recruitment of patients, but we don't know what other aspects or whether conceptually this person was involved in other aspects of the design and the conceptualization of the project and statistical analyses and other things as well.
I suspect he won't be involved in anything. And I think, and I will add that there might be lack of confidence in what they report as well. So the role of Edward here is simply recruiting.
Yeah, no, if it's simply recruiting, then it doesn't constitute authorship. In a big team, publication plan, including authorship, membership, organized a priori before it actually happens, and people agree on this, so there's not
Yes.
problems.
We're coming to that, yes.
After the event. I think the other thing is that if this young doctor was offered authorship and the findings could be positive, it could be negative, they could be overinterpreted, underinterpreted, blah blah blah. There's a whole heap of issues.
There's a lot of risk.
If the individual doesn't have stewardship of the of the overall
Yeah.
research.
Absolutely. It's
But there
quite
are-
risky. It's not only
Yeah.
not ethical, it's quite risky.
But there are also cases where, like biased statisticians, they could be not across all of the concepts, but they're included in the authorship for their specific contribution
Yes.
as part of the research project.
That would be less risk because there'd be an agreement ahead of time. Yeah, I agree with that. Does anyone else in the room have anything to add? Okay, anyone in Chicago would you like to say anything to this? Has anyone else come in?
It's still just me at the moment. I think, to be honest with you, you said most of the things I was going to say. I was just going to bring up that it does sound quite risky. Again, if he hasn't actually read the paper, they could be saying that who knows if they've carried out ethically, or whether or not they're saying like results, conclusions that he agrees with. I think it's a bit of a big risk on his part. to just put his name on without having that.
Right. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next one. This is all in authorship. You can see how things are happening in the authorship field. Okay, so this is something I adjudicated on. Let me go back. And still hanging. So Professor Peter has acquired a new piece of equipment from a large grant he successfully applied for, using ideas from his large research team. So he employed a large team of researchers who approached their research from different perspectives. The equipment was promptly used by 2 of his research team, and they drew up a manuscript to report their important findings. Although he wasn't not involved in the conduct of this research, Professor Peter then requested to be added to the author list of the manuscript. And the question is, should his research team add his name in the authorship list? Now, most codes of ethics, of research ethics, will say to you, providing equipment is not provision of authorship, or not, doesn't mean eligibility for authorship. I'll just give you that kind of caveat to help you decide, but I would like to see what you think. Would you give him authorship? So there's it's an interesting scenario, because even my colleagues, some colleagues said, give him authorship, like get him off your back. He was really aggressive. And others, and some of the researchers in that team were absolutely adamant. But who's right? Who's right? Okay.
So it looks like 100% of our delegates have answered no, but Peter's name should not be added to the authorship.
Okay. What if I add to you that this Peter guy, Professor Peter, is a very important man and has a lot of money, and he's recognized by the government for his contributions to society? Andrew B.
But did he contribute to the research?
He gave them the equipment and they used it first off.
Even that's a transaction.
Yes.
No.
No. What would you say to him? No, this is a real story, honestly, and I'm working on it. And he has complained in writing to the journal about his own staff. And one of the authors, the lead author, has left the team. So there are consequences. She's left the team, she's left the country. She's left the country in a huff, quite upset. But she hasn't been able to resolve either way. So in this sort of scenario, people ask what happens. What's happened is he's lodged a complaint with the journal that they submitted to, and the journal comes back to the university, the integrity office, and they ask, what's the story? Can you please fix this and tell us who's the author? Who is and who isn't? And it's been a very difficult conversation, very strong-minded, very powerful, and used to having his way. And he is the head of a huge group of people researching cutting-edge research, actually, and he knows it. But what would you do?
I think it needs to be sanctioned
Should be sanctioned.
by the university, and they should take a stand. And that's where once the university starts taking a stand, then it starts to filter down.
And I think there might be change of culture. He will go down fighting if he does go down on this one. But, you know, this is about power imbalance, a huge example of power imbalance and abuse of power to a certain degree. And I might add to this scenario that when we asked him for his view about the manuscript and where he contributed, he asked us to provide the manuscript. He hadn't seen it. It was just in principle that he requested to be an author because he provided, because you're my team. So in a way, the accountability here is not just on you know, on the team and the real authors, but also on the person who is insisting on authorship. Unvalidated, unwarranted, and he actually doesn't need it. He's at the upper echelons of the whole wide world, but he just wants to you know, put his name on something on this publication. Any other thoughts? What would you do if you were this person on his team?
I'd be terrified, but I wouldn't want to be part of a team that's led by someone like that. And I know there's a lot of complexity in there in terms of where you're at in your career, and you might have worked really hard to get there, and it's a huge risk to you if he's that powerful. But I think we're at a point we've got to try and stop this somewhere, and if we keep letting it go, it's just going to get worse. And I think it's a huge reflection of the culture, not all of the culture, but a huge cultural issue in academia that's allowed this to happen and sort of, yeah, I guess let it go for so long that people think that they can do that, because that's clearly terrible leadership and doesn't he's obviously just doing it as a side thing for his own ego, because why else would you do it if you're that high up? Like, it's, yeah, incredibly
Because he can.
unfortunate. Yeah, it's
Because he can.
which is what
How?
I think has triggered me. So unnecessary.
Okay, so we are putting ourselves in the shoes of the lead researcher, who is female, and this is her first paper, and she really it hit her like a tsunami. Okay, and she left the country. She did leave the team. She does have the moral courage to stand up for herself, but is fighting hugely, immensely. What about if we put ourselves in his position? So let's say we applied for a grant, a big one, and we got it. And we bought the equipment, and the team is working on different projects. How is this going to pan out? What are you expecting from your team? Tim, you're a leader of a huge team. Tell me what you think. If you got, you know, if you got a big machine, or you got a big database to use, how would you go about allowing people to use your equipment and acknowledging or authorship?
Yeah, thanks, Betty. It's a good question. I think the key principle here, as I mentioned before, is that in a big team, there could be a lot of smaller staff projects. The key issue is having a publication plan at the outset, a priority, and when members of the team know which papers, which aspects of the research they're personally going to make a author contribution to. People could make acknowledgement contributions to various publications, but if this is done at the outset, then situations like this could be avoided. And culture is a very, very difficult thing to measure, but you know it exists. It's a very difficult thing to change. And like, you know, there's a saying of like a fish rots from the head. And so very often, if you're going to affect a significant culture change, then there needs to be change in the in the leadership way
Yes.
of doing things. It's really difficult for a more junior member of the team to have a moral stance, have an ethical stance, have a professional stance in relation to affecting a change, but it is possible. Universities and other organisations need to have mechanisms in place to deal with complex matters such as this, like better to deal with them ahead of time, not post hoc after the event. After the event, they get very, very messy, and people get very
It's true.
unhappy with the outcomes and seem, they seem hard done by, and everything seems very unfair. Communication is the key at the outset. I'm definitely learning a lot about this all the time, especially sort of leading a relatively large team where we have probably somewhere between 40 and 50 people involved in a project at any one time. So clarity about people's roles at the outset, that's the key.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I just wanted to add that this person also rejected acknowledgement. We offered as an olive branch. Would you accept? And they were happy to. They were actually happy to give him acknowledgement, a big one. Thank you for the grant. Thank you for the scholarship. Thank you for the equipment. He refused. So it is a very messy story. He's still to this day, she's left and he still complained, and she has resubmitted to another journal, awaiting for another tsunami, which is a shame, isn't it? That she's got to spend maybe a couple of years resolving this, but it's it's one of her main papers as a postdoc. So after 4 scenarios on authorship, and I'm sorry I kept on honing in, but that is how complex authorship can be. And the resolution is actually exactly what Tim is saying. Communication before. So the very basic requirements, take home messages. Here we go. This is not going down. An author should have a substantial intellectual contribution to the research through at least one of the following: conception and design, data analysis and interpretation, drafting or editing significant parts of the work in order to contribute to the interpretation and reporting of the findings. If we think about Professor Peter, he did none of those, right? The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors has published these guidelines. I was interested in these, and they are really good standards that state substantial contribution to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data for the work. And so I capitalized "and" because it's not "or," it's "and" drafting the work or revising it critically for important intellectual content, and final approval of the version to be published, and agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work, in ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work are appropriately investigated and resolved. So that's about accountability. In that last scenario, there's no ticking of any boxes. In the scenarios before, they're about doing people favors in the culture of academia. Wrong, wrong, wrong. But we really have to work on that. And we have to work on the supervisors rather than the younger upcoming students. We have been advised at Sydney Uni to negotiate authorship before. So I've highlighted, communicate early and often, discuss authorship arrangements at an early stage, review decisions periodically. So sometimes the teams change. Sometimes, the leader hands over to someone else, or there's someone added, there's someone gone. So these decisions are not cemented, but they are, a starting point, especially if manuscript changes between submission and final acceptance for publication. This bit now is being manipulated by some countries. So some countries are now getting it approved and then selling authorship and adding authors. So be aware. Appoint an executive. So usually this is the PhD student or the lead researcher in the team, or the corresponding author. So if I'm in my team, for example, I've got my students, I would be the corresponding author perhaps, or we'd agree that I don't have the time to follow up on these things. I'd give it to Deb. Deb, you be the communicator and the corresponding author. And that's what usually happens, but record it. Let's communicate together. Also communicating with the publisher if that's necessary, but sometimes that's a step ahead. Coming back to ground, make decisions by consensus. If you feel that there's some kind of, disagreement coming up, you need to discuss it early on and try to get consensus. Everyone should be on the same page. Consider this agreement form. Okay, and it's a really good one, actually. It's been drawn up by experts, and I think it's really good. What the title is, submitted to what journal, the date, and then each author and their contribution and their sign off. Okay, what did you contribute? What do you think you contributed to? Or what have we agreed to contribute, each of us? And when you do take someone off, make sure that they know and you get the permission and that they're aware of it. Anything that's non-authorship has to be acknowledged. I think that's a very, very good start for anyone who wants to avoid what Tim is saying is actually coming out of a lot of experience. And so is this. Disagreements on authorships are surprising. They come left field. You don't plan for disagreement. And when it hits hard. So this kind of negotiation and commitment and clarity is a good way to start. Now, that doesn't mean that, you don't have a culture in the lab or something that, needs to be addressed, but it's a good way to make everyone aware that, authorship is not for free. It's not just because you got a machine or you got us a grant or something, perhaps. So here are some of the do's and don'ts. Do appropriately recognize contributions. Read the research code if you have one. Most institutions would. Consider journal and discipline standards. Who's first author, who's last, who's second. There are different disciplines and different orders. Discuss authorship early and often. Don't be afraid to bring it up if you're a student. Don't be afraid of your early career to say, can I just discuss this? Are we agreed on this? It's not rude. It's not something that the supervisor is going to chop your head off for. Acknowledge contributions other than authorship and keep records of arrangements relating to authorship. I reckon, I'd probably stop the sentence at keep records, because I think the records are very important and they do come in handy when there is a dispute, heaven forbid. Don't stop communicating with collaborators and colleagues. Keep communicating. Don't leave the university without planning how your work will be published. That's what this girl did. This early career researcher left the university without resolving this problem, and it's left dangling. Include guest authors. Don't include guest authors who haven't contributed. It's black and white here. Whoever is, umming and ahhing about it, just don't do it. And don't add researchers as authors without their consent. As Tim gave us that example, don't do that. So authorship needs to be looked at from an ethical and technical perspective. Don't be afraid to negotiate. Don't be afraid to ask your supervisor. Tell them, you attended this workshop and they brought up this topic and what do I do? All right. We were going to have a stretch and refresh here, but I'll just keep on going, yeah? Scenario 5. as part of your PhD write-up, you include your unpublished literature review from your own honours degree project. So you've done this topic and you didn't publish your lit review and you're going to make it a chapter, say. You believe using your own work to report findings is perfectly legitimate. It's your own work, after all, isn't it? So what happens these days is that all theses are put through Turnitin or software that picks up, and it can be flagged as plagiarism, okay? And that is the danger. It's not about it not being your work. It's about how you handle it and how you disclose. So is it okay to use your own work from the past?
So just for the people who joined a bit later, if you'd like to participate in Socrative, you can either search Socrative and join the room July 13. Otherwise, up on the screen, you can access this QR code.
Okay.
Oh,
Good. No, this is good.
it's the first one this
Yes,
happened.
first one today.
Yeah.
So,
The question was, is it okay to use your own work from the past? And from our delegates, we have 33% who've answered yes, it is okay, and 67% who have said no, it is not okay.
so I'm happy because we're not all just doing the no. It's actually quite okay to say yes or no. In fact, your own work can be used. It's not a crime to use your work, but it's the way you actually present your work. If you're going to present it as a, this is my original work and I've never submitted it before and no one's ever seen it, you're going to get into trouble. But if you do say, this is a chapter from my honours degree that has not been published at all, but, or submitted to something, or because it is your work. It's genuinely your work. No, it's not good to just slot it in as a chapter and you've saved yourself, 6 months of doing it again. That's not right. It has to be properly acknowledged. So I'm going to invite any comments from the floor. What do you think about that? This chapter that you want to use as your first chapter, you're running out of time and you want to use your own honours work. What do you think of that? So this is also a real story. This is someone who has used their honours and put it in their thesis, and it ran through the software and it came back, with the bling, 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 bling. This is plagiarized, and it's like fully plagiarized because it's been submitted in the system here, and it's an electronic submission. So it was caught, and it had to go to adjudication. It had to be decided upon, and that took months for us to actually come back and look at, what happened here. And all it needed was a proper disclosure, and a very clear one. And this student did say something in very small print, but it didn't get, through the software. Tim.
Irene, thanks, Betty. I think there is also another consideration, and that's when you enroll at a PhD here, you can only count work undertaken since commencement
Yes,
of your PhD. So
Yeah.
the honours would have been undertaken prior
yes,
to commencing a PhD. Given that honours work was unpublished, but was written by the author, by the candidate, that's what makes it a little bit messy. But I think the actual rules and regulations for commencement of a PhD here make that very clear.
yes.
that it
I
can't be
agree. It's true, the rules here in this university, but generally speaking, reusing your own work can be tricky, and just being aware that you need to disclose and open up, and it doesn't matter if it's a PhD or or something else that you're writing up. We're using a PhD as an example, but it could be anything. Just reusing your own work from a submission that wasn't published doesn't mean that it won't be detected. So it will be claimed as plagiarism, and it will cause you a headache. And that's probably also in line with the rules. But in terms of authorship, we need to be able to learn how to, disclose properly and reference properly if it's public. But this one wasn't published, and it just went. The lights went all red, and was a bit of an alarm for the student as well. A lot of angst that could have been saved by proper disclosure. Yes, I don't know your name, sorry.
I'm Glenys from East Jennings. I'm just intrigued. What was the outcome of the adjudication process?
We had to ask them to go back to their thesis and put in a proper disclosure up front. They couldn't pull it out because it was already part of the thesis, and we thought it was a bit cruel, but it was a slap on the wrist for this one. Had it been more insidious, if they had meant to be plagiarizing, they didn't mean to, and the supervisor didn't know better. So sometimes it's all on the supervisor. The supervisor could have said, as Tim did, you can't use it. You've got to either rewrite it or redo it, or but you still also, I would really definitely, because these things can be rejigged. So you might start with a lit review that was done in honours and redo it, and some of it will be overlap. And that also will come up on the Turnitin software. So you need to be very careful how you guide your student into disclosure and proper acknowledgement that this was at the beginning and it's being revised and redone and something like that. Yeah.
Is it classified as a self-plagiarism?
It was classified as plagiarism.
Not self.
No, but we knew it was self-plagiarism. We knew what the situation was, but say it was sent to be adjudicated outside by the Pharmacy Council, they wouldn't know that it was, they would say that's plagiarism. You can see all the chunks that have been highlighted. So yeah, they'd have to go by the evidence. We knew it was their honours. They got away with the slap on the wrist, but rewriting the chapter. But we're just trying to use these examples as highlights for us all to avoid these pitfalls. And we're writing theses all the time, and we're correcting them, and supervisors might not bring this up, so it needs to be brought up. Any more comments? Yes.
Can I just ask, and I've wondered about this before, so this is a great case, because I think I had discussions with my supervisors right at the start, and this probably isn't quite where they went, but it's okay, we've got there. Obviously people publish a lot or write a lot in the same area over time. And there's obviously key phrases, definitions, things like that you might use when you have a particular style of writing. So I guess it moves a little bit away from this case because there's rules with a PhD, and I know that I have to sign something to say it's all original work completed during that time, so that kind of takes that out. But how do you manage if you're repeat publishing and writing in the same area, because you're likely to accidentally come across similar issues? Obviously, you're not going to copy verbatim, well, you shouldn't, but yeah, it seems like.
Okay,
that's
so-
what you manage.
All of us do marking and we all have to mark off the turn in reports. And we know that some terminology can't be avoided. It's got to be repeated. And if you have a certain style, it might come of writing, it might come up again as flagged. The reason why I keep on hammering on about the marker or the supervisor is that they have to use their judgment. They have to use their judgment. Sometimes I get, an assignment that has turn it in similarity report 77% or 80%, and you just go, oh my God. But you look at it and you say, oh, I see, this person has copy pasted the question into it. Or they've used a similar, we do encourage paraphrasing, but there are terms we can't avoid. It's about using common sense as well. With this case, this one came out with all the alarm bells because it was large chunks of it. You just couldn't avoid, and it was a lit review. So be careful how we use our honours projects and how we repeat and how we report and where you want to go with it. You want to submit it as a thesis, that is something. So your thesis has to be spotless, clean, no doubt about it. It's all my work and it's all new work and it's not repeated. It's not duplicated. Yeah. Anything else you'd like to bring up? Andrew? Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. I guess on the other side of that, there's also those loan similarity ones where the loan part is a really key part.
Yeah.
And that's guiding the whole rest of the,
Of course.
the paper, and it's not the original part. So the interpretation goes both ways, not just for the big red flags, but also some of the little red flags.
I had a report sent to me
So probably the one that I sent you.
of the 80 questions. One answer was flagged. It was only a few lines, but it was in a language beyond the capability of that student, and it was flagged. And that was only, a couple of lines, and it was textbook language, the language that you and I don't speak. So it was cut and flagged, and it made for a huge issue. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't mean the quantity, it is the quality, but we also have to use our common sense. This is software, this is robotic, color-coded, whatever, word-coded, but it's something that we have to take with a grain of salt and investigate before we point fingers. But if you get in trouble like this one did, you've got to try and learn from that lesson, so to speak. Yes, Tim?
I think one of the important things is attribution or citation of where the information or the work has come from, and so that can avoid these types of issues, or when they are flagged in papers and software, then the reviewer of those in type reports will be able to quickly see, where, how, and why
Yes.
the results came up.
Yeah.
How they came up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tim. Before I move on, Chicago Hub, do you want to comment?
I don't think I have much more to add, to be honest, but it's been really interesting listening to everything that's been said, so thank you.
Thank you for listening. You're the only man standing, lady standing.
The last one.
Okay, scenario 6. I think we have 11, so we'll go through them. You work as a researcher in a lab of a famous academic. This is similar to the guy who was giving a hard time. You are asked to draw up a manuscript about a recent lab experiment. To expedite the publication, you are provided with a template. which the academic has developed for writing up experiments and told to use it as is, with certain parts and the data results inserted where indicated. So it's like they have this template for this lab and just put in your results, put in whatever you want to add. Is it okay to use templates for this purpose, particular to certain workplaces, such as laboratories with expertise in certain disciplines, to write manuscripts for publications or chapters of a thesis? Yes or no? Let's see your thoughts about it. So we've got mixed results. Yes and no. So the majority said yes?
Yes.
The majority said yes. It's okay to use templates. So, okay, accepted. What do you think? Why is it okay to use a template that might come up with some similarity in the Turnitin software?
If the lab is doing lots and lots and lots of the same type of experiment, just with different theme and variation, then it is more efficient and to use some sort of a template. And if we look at manuscripts in general, they all have a template of sorts.
Yes.
And if you've got one which is a little bit more specific for your lab work, then that can certainly expedite the process. And
But how much of a template is a template?
well, that's right. So we don't know what a template actually.
So if the template includes a ready written intro and a ready written
Okay, if it's
method?
got a ready written intro with a ready, I mean, the methods perhaps, but the intro, well, depends on what going into the intro for mine should have a focus on the rationale for the particular study, and perhaps a little bit of background information, but it should focus on the rationale for the study.
Okay,
It's going to be a lot of times where the methods are the methods, in which case the methods are going to be very similar. The
yes,
similar method that's being used. And actually, we want labs to be experts in the methods being applied. So.
so if you got a report that this was, 50% plagiarized, inverted commas, and would you give them the benefit of the doubt? Would you say, I don't see the results have been,
Yeah, if it's in the method section, I wouldn't be particularly concerned.
okay. So that answers some of your question about how much common sense can be, utilized in these kinds of things. Templates can be used. Yes, Deb, you wanted to say something?
I was just gonna ask, like in response to that. If it's from the same laboratory, obviously the methods are very similar, it would make sense because they follow a similar protocol, but. If you then saw a different laboratory with a very similar method, would that then flag something and kind of how would you go about that? Like, maybe they did.
You'd have to discern. You'd have to be, careful what you're accepting and what you're not.
I mean, I think the key here is just attribution or citation of the method from the previous group. And so, more and more these days, people are publishing a protocol. The protocol will include the method of their particular study, or a particular study could have been undertaken, and 2 or 3 publications, have arisen from that body of work. And the method could say, here's a brief,
Mm.
sort of overview of the methods which have been reported in more detail.
Yeah.
Elsewhere, and then cite back or attribute the original work. It's entirely appropriate to cite other people's methods, because the idea of the methods is they're written up in adequate detail to allow other groups to follow the method and repeat it. So that,
And that's the idea.
yeah.
Yes, yes. Okay, so we're agreed on templates to a certain degree. Everything with a grain of salt. Okay, does anyone have a story to share about this kind of scenario? Anything about plagiarism that occurs to you? We might pause a bit later, further down. Chicago Hub, if you please want to just unmute and talk to us. I hope you're still awake. It's probably late there.
I am still awake, don't worry. I'm taking it all in.
So plagiarism and academic dishonesty. Staff and students must take responsibility for ensuring their work includes accurate and complete references to the work of others. That's exactly what Tim was saying. Do reference and paraphrase appropriately. Discuss referencing standards in your discipline with your supervisor and understand them. Access training if you're unsure, because we're not born, knowing all this stuff. We need to know it by training. Don't copy work of others without attribution. And don't submit previously submitted old work for credit without disclosure. So these are the do's and don'ts. Scenario 7. May moves to a lab in a different school to continue her study on a pharmaceutical product. The breakaway from the first lab was not pleasant. After several months of work, May is delighted to publish her first paper as lead author in a relatively prestigious journal of pharmaceutics. Her new supervisor, Professor B, is the only other author. Seeing the new publication, May's former supervisor, Professor A, is enraged. He alleges that the main idea presented in the publication was developed whilst May was under his supervision, just before the relationship broke down. Professor A accuses May of stealing his intellectual property and not including him as an author on the publication. Of course, May is very upset and insists that her older publication, that older publications by Professor A describe ideas in the paper that have been available in the public domain for more than 12 months and have been appropriately cited in the article she has published. Now, this is about intellectual property. And clearly, Professor A is still in the domain, and she's just moved on to another lab to a person who is in the same domain, and there is overlap. So do you think, first of all, my first question, Professor A should be an author on the paper? And do you think May has stolen Professor A's IP if she has appropriately cited the article in the article she's published? So let's look at, should he be an author first? Can you see the importance of communication here? Again, we come across things that are so difficult. Oh, we got 14%. Yes?
Yes, and 86% no. And I'm going to just move us on to the next question.
Has she stolen his IP? I'm going to, my next few slides are going to be explaining what IP is, but let's just get,
So 88% have said no. IP has not been stolen, and 13% have said yes.
Can I ask anyone who said yes, why did you think she has stolen? Would anyone like to comment to that? Do you think she's stolen IP? Okay. So, should he be an author? The majority say no. Has she stolen his IP? The majority say no. Is that correct? Yes. So, no. It's no for both. It seems the majority say no for both. So, how do you think this could have been avoided? Let me put it to you that way. After all these little issues about authorship and this is IP, this is a bit more complex because IP can be a patent, can be something that makes money, generates money. It can be bigger than Ben-Hur, and it could be nothing. I mean, it could be just an idea, but still, it's something to acknowledge whilst we're talking about authorship. IP here, I think when I read this, I thought if she appropriately cited him and his ideas have been in the public domain for a year, and that if she can prove that, if she can show that, then she shouldn't be accused of stealing or misappropriating authorship or anything. She should be allowed to publish on her own. It could have been something they could have negotiated, but the relationship had broken down before she left. So we've got to acknowledge that human nature is hard to navigate around. We're not robots, we're not machines, and we have to also acknowledge that we all have feelings, and she probably didn't want to go back and ask him for permission. Does he have the right to challenge? He might challenge, but that doesn't mean he wins. So I'll move on, just in the interest of time. I believe it's kind of 46. I don't have much time. So scenario 8, the study you are undertaking involves utilization of a validated survey tool from Minnesota. It's available, but at a rather hefty price. Other researchers have developed adaptations of the validated survey and published their work successfully. These surveys are available at no price at all. Permission to use any of these unvalidated surveys is easy to acquire. Okay, so the question is, would you use the validated instrument or the new freebie? The free one or the one that is validated at a hefty price? This is also about IP, and this is also about acknowledging. This is about whether or not, I mean, you might not have the money. It's 50-50 split.
That's interesting.
Very interesting. 50-50 split. Does anyone want to talk to it, please? Anyone want to talk? Who would use the validated one, even at a hefty price? Andrew.
I just thought it came down to how you, if someone's reviewing your work and the quality of your work, then they're gonna look at whether it was a validated instrument, and then that's gonna have a bearing on how they view the overall work.
Yeah, yes. What else would you be considering when you're using?
I agree actually with my colleague here, using a validated survey. It helps to improve your work actually.
The quality of your work.
Yes,
Using the validated instrument.
yes, while the unvalidated, it can harm your reputation because the quality of work.
Yes, so using an unvalidated one is actually not exactly in your best interest, really. But it's also about IP and whether or not the ones who are unvalidated acknowledged, whether they consulted, whether they paid a fee or not. I mean, if they didn't pay anything and they didn't check with the authors, you would wonder how, how they got to their results. And how can you build on their results? Because we are trying to do science that has merit. That's part of our research ethics scenarios. My PhD was like that. So I had a validated, really big survey that cost a fortune. I had to get a little grant to pay for it, but when I got the results, they put it through, they actually had commercialized the survey in Minnesota. It's a true story. They analyzed it quickly through their own robotic setup, and they did a great job for me. Whereas the unvalidated surveys that were floating around were not really even for the purpose that I wanted it for. I would have had to adapt and work on it, and it just went further away from the validation that they had. But yeah, it does cost. And also, even when I paid for it, but I still had to attribute to them their IP and their survey. It still stands. So intellectual property is an intangible asset created through intellectual or creative endeavors. It's complex. Common forms of IP rights include patents, trademarks, registered designs, moral rights, copyright. There's background IP, there's project IP, and there's third-party IP. And it's defined here, it's described. There's 3 different types. Background IP, sometimes called pre-existing IP, refers to IP made available for a specific project, which was created by you or others independently of this project, and or prior to the start of this project. So there's something in the background. Project IP is something that you might have, you might have created, or your collaborators in the course of conducting the project. Third-party IP is owned by any person or institution other than yours, which is the Minnesota people. Examples of third-party include your previous employer, if any, your research collaborators individually or their institutions, funding bodies or publishers. So it brings into, this last line brings into question, your previous employer. You've got to weigh it up. You have to weigh it up, and you have to be very clear about it. Who owns IP generated at a university? It's usually owned by the staff and honorary and title holders. They're their own owners of their own IP, unless specifically commissioned by the university. The author may then choose to transfer or license those rights to others, such as publishers, or, that's why they always say, please sign off your IP when your journal is accepted, your article. Other types of IP created by staff or honorary title holders are owned by the university, if created in the course of their employment by the university, using university resources, at the specific request of the university, or as part of a project supported by funding obtained or provided by the university. So be careful here. If you've got a small grant from the university, that IP belongs to them. Other types of IP created by students are owned by the student, unless the student has agreed otherwise, the student supervisor has made a substantial contribution, or the IP is created using the university's background IP. So the do's and don'ts in very short terms: do ask and be aware of who owns the research data and the results that you're producing. If in doubt, seek advice as early as possible. That can be from the research ethics office, or anyone who's, knows their stuff. Ensure your own academic independence in reporting research findings, that there's no coercion. Don't use IP belonging to others without arrangements. And don't ignore agreements in place relating to IP. Comes back to bite. Don't think, I just write this a little bit. You can't get away with it. This is a bit of a long one. I'd like to give you 2 minutes to read it. So Professor X is a leading cancer researcher. 10 years ago, she was flown to Switzerland by a big pharma. She delivered a presentation. As part of the trip, she received business class flights, 5-star hotel accommodation for 10 days, and a cash equivalent of $350 a day. She had declared it to the university at the time, but hasn't updated her declarations since. Since that trip, she's not been directly involved with that company, although she did some consulting work with other companies, for which she is handsomely compensated, both in cash and in kind. Don't you want her job? Last month, Professor X was the senior author. This is the clinch. She was a senior author on a major study submitted to a prestigious journal, comparing a range of chemotherapy drugs, including 3 manufactured by the company that had hosted her 10 years ago in Switzerland. The study ultimately concluded that the company's proprietary Cancer Cure is the most effective drug currently in existence for treating cancers with the best side effect profile. And no conflicts of interests were declared by any of the authors. So my question to you, once you absorb that, so that's hopping around a lot, but is it something that needs to be declared as a conflict of interest? Should she have added to that manuscript something about her interests, even though it was 10 years ago?
Okay, so everyone in the room thinks that Professor X should have declared.
Right, so it's a long scenario, I apologize for it, but it tells you that conflicts of interest can go back in years and people could trace it back. And they'll say, well, of course she said that because she was taken to, the UK and Switzerland ages ago and she was treated like a princess. And they know, and she's known. So yes, I'm going to move on because I've run out of time, to be very honest with you. After years of research and contribution to your field, you are finally invited to review grant applications for a large government scheme involving millions of dollars. The honor is notable, and you are excited to join the team. On receiving your lot of applications, you recognize the work of one of your colleagues in the faculty you belong to. You don't feel that would have any effect on your judgment, though, and you continue to grade the application. My question to you is, should you stop reviewing or declare a conflict of interest? And in the world of pharmacy, the world of pharmacy is a small world. And I bet you a lot of people do come across this scenario.
So everyone thinks that we should declare.
They should stop reviewing and declare a conflict of interest. And I'm on to the last one. This is the last one. You have submitted your manuscript to a well-established journal. The peer review report came back with spiteful comments and demands to include certain citations for papers of an author known in the field. The comments were unreasonable and not constructive. In fact, they were demoralizing and insulting. Is there a case to be made? This is a general policy kind of question. Is there a case to be made for more transparency? For example, make it compulsory for reviewers to be identifiable and declare a conflict of interest? What's your opinion on that? 80-20.
Majority thinks yes.
So can I pick the brain of whoever said no? It shouldn't be made compulsory? Or does anyone believe that we shouldn't? I don't know who said no. I would have liked to have heard that opinion. However, it's just food for thought anyway. So I'll just go on and talk to the topic of conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest exists if where there's a divergence between duty or interest of a person and their professional responsibilities. The presence of a conflict of interest does not, in and of itself, imply that any wrongdoing has occurred. Doesn't mean, you can declare it, because there are different types of conflicts of interest, and they're not only financial. They can be personal, family, professional, organizational. There's many different types, but conflicts of interest are usually graded as actual. So you are in a position to be influenced by your interests. Potential, you may be influenced by your interest at some stage. Or you're perceived, you are in a position to appear to be influenced by your interests. So these three very clearly defined categories of conflicts of interest are very interesting to be aware of. It's not always possible to avoid, but what you can do is to disclose or discuss or talk about it. Sometimes I examine people and they say to me, well, you have a conflict of interest with your students at Sydney Uni. And I'm just going, I don't, I really don't. I don't know one from another. But they will say, well, it's a perceived conflict of interest and you need to declare it and you need to tell us if you recognize names. So there's different types of conflicts that we have to manage. It is best to disclose, discuss and manage rather than conceal or ignore or argue back. If on balance, a fair-minded person or a member of the public is likely to have doubts about your motivation, you should declare the interest and develop a plan to avoid or manage the conflict. For a low risk potential, is there something in the chat? I'm sorry, I have to check out of the building. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I think she's gone. Sorry. For low risk potential or perceived conflicts, the very act of declaring may be sufficient, but you may need to prepare a management plan which sets out the details of how the conflict can be managed. There are, this is the 6 R's. You can see they're smaller in size, in format, because this one is really a tough one. So you can register the existence of a conflict, restrict your involvement in that activity, recruit a different third party, remove yourself from part of it or all of the activity, relinquish the external interest that is creating the conflict, or resign. That's why resign is in small print, but it's there. So, do acknowledge that external interests are a normal part of life and understand this can lead to conflicts of interest. Do maintain a list of interests relevant to your research. Do consider journal and funder requirements for submission and disclose external interests that may be relevant to your research. Don't think that any conflict of interest is automatically bad. Don't ignore or conceal conflicts of interest, and don't limit your thinking to financial interests. So I'm sorry, we did run out of time. I did want to put something light. See, I see you're the author or co-author, and you came up with some new insights in the field of quantum mechanics, which you'll explain further next week. I will. I haven't got a clue. So thank you for attending. Any questions before we sign off on the session? Anyone want to pick my brain or discuss or comment? Otherwise, thank you very much. Hadi?
What do you do inside when you have a paper being reviewed by? What do you do when you have a paper being reviewed by someone and recommending to cite a couple of references that you believe they're not actually relevant to your work. They're not actually very relevant to your manuscript.
So, and
I mean, when you have a reviewer suggesting to cite some references,
right, so when you get a reviewer who's a bit spiteful and wants you to cite their own work, if it's hidden, I think you would have to answer and see if it's reasonable. If not, respond and say, this is not relevant to the work that I was doing. And you can do that in your rebuttal. It's your right to send a rebuttal in that way. Okay. Anyone else want to ask a question? All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
So there's morning tea on at the moment. If you just go down the corridor and the common room on your right, and it's your oral presentations, you started. You have about just under 30 minutes.